So shalom, shana tova, welcome here, welcome online. Hi, Bubby. I know my Bubby's watching. I don't know who else is watching, but I know my Bubby's watching. A lot of people are watching, and you're part of our family. You're part of our virtual family, our real-time family, as we now enter into some words of Torah. But not before I share with you a recent Washington Post edition where they had participants write in favorite stories about in the old days, right back in my day. In my day, wrote one contributor, we couldn't afford shoes, so we went barefoot. In winter, we had to wrap our feet with barbed wire for traction. Of course, walking to school, always uphill, both ways. Another contributor wrote, we didn't have fancy, schmancy health food restaurants serving tofu and whatnot back in my day. Every day, we ate lots of easily recognizable animal parts, along with potatoes. In my day, wrote another contributor, we didn't have handheld calculators. We had to do addition on our fingers. To subtract, we had to amputate some of those fingers. Back in my day, 60 Minutes wasn't just a bunch of gray-haired liberal 80-year-old guys. It was a bunch of gray-haired liberal 50-year-old guys. In my day, wrote another, we didn't have virtual reality. If a one-eyed razorback barbarian warrior was chasing you with an axe, you better run fast. Back in my day, they hadn't invented electricity. We had to watch television by candlelight. In my day, we didn't have water. We had to smash together our own hydrogen and oxygen atoms. Kids today think the world revolves around them. Well, in my day, the sun revolved around the world, and the world was perched on the back of a giant tortoise shell. In my day, the list of fetches goes on, and I am now ashamed to say I have joined the ranks of the in my day fetching crowd. And I realized it this past summer on holiday with my family as we were driving at one point in a rental minivan. My kids were fetching about, there's no DVD player in this minivan, and I found myself saying, in my day, we didn't have DVD players. We had to count bottles of beer on the wall. What a strange game, by the way, for kids, isn't it? They were fetching about an iPad that went down on the plane, man down, right? And no iPad, and so I didn't know what to say, and I was mad, and I was angry. I said, back in my day, we didn't have iPads. We just had to sit there and stare at the back of the seat, making things up. They were fetching at one point about the hotel and not finding the remote control, the clicker. In my day, we didn't have clickers. You had to lay on the floor and turn the dials with your toes or make your little brother do it. It went on, and I realized at that moment I had graduated to not such an elite club because, in fact, this is what every generation does. We think that we're the greatest generation. The one that's coming after us is not such a great generation. The only difference between now and then is we have statistics to prove that this is the worst up-and-coming generation in the history of humanity. Millennials, those of you born in 1980 or younger, right? The incidence of narcissistic personality disorder is 3 times as high for that group as it is for those of us who are 65 or older. Millennials got so many participation trophies growing up just for showing up that now 40% of them believe they should be promoted every 2 years regardless of performance. They're fame obsessed. 3 times as many middle school girls want to grow up to be a personal assistant to Selena Gomez or somebody famous rather than be senator. 4 times as many would rather be her assistant than be a CEO, a real setback for women's lib. Their development is stunted. It is the first time in human history that more people 18 to 29 years old of age are living with their parents than with a spouse. They're so convinced of their own greatness that a national study has shown that the vast majority of them believe in any given moral dilemma situation, they need no moral code. They need no religious system. They need no God. They'll just be able to feel what's right. They're great, they're grandiose, and now they're even God, at least in their eyes. But before they go running and screaming from the room, before we lynch these poor kids, maybe the problem isn't with them, with you. Maybe the problem is actually with us. If every generation does this, the problem probably is with us, and it is. Maybe we judge the upcoming generation too harshly, and maybe we romanticize the past, overrating our own greatness. And maybe we fictionalize a dreadful future that may or may not exist, and we underrate the up-and-coming generation's greatness. After all, we've been playing this in my day card long before any of us showed up on the scene. It goes all the way back to the Torah itself. Abraham, right? The great mighty Abraham, the visionary. There was no way his son had a chance. Abraham was known for his outreach, his piety, which we're going to read about tomorrow. He has a shining moment called the binding of Isaac. And then comes Isaac. Isaac never really leaves home. Isaac is an introvert. His father has no faith in the guy. He sets him up on a date. He doesn't think Isaac can take care of that himself. Isaac never has that shining moment like Abraham. And in so many ways, it feels like Isaac, at least in the annals of history, is just no Abraham. And he feels that way, I imagine, to his dad as well. Isaac's son Jacob, forget about it. As a teen, he's a liar. He's a huckster, finagling the birthright from his brother, duping his father. His son Joseph was an arrogant jerk. He had this Technicolor dream code. He lorded it over his brothers. The mighty Moses, right? Can you even name Moses' son's name? The poor kid never stood a chance. David HaMelech, King David, now that was a great king. He had a son, Solomon. He was a good king. He wasn't a great king, he was a good king. He had no chance. His father overshadowed him. He was such a great man. The Israelites in the time of the Torah were deemed as spiritual giants by the first temple generation after them. Then comes the second temple generation, and they look back and see the first temple generation. Now they were giants. And then the shtetl, hundreds, thousands of years later. The moment you say the shtetl, the old country, somehow we've been programmed that song tradition goes off in the back of our head, and everything that comes out of somebody's mouth when they say the old country is better. From kavanah, spirituality, to kenegalach, matzo ball soup, everything was better back in the old country, back in the good old days. And I hear it here on the North Shore all the time. Back in Chelsea, back in Malden, back in Lynn, back in Mattapan. Now that was a Jewish community, right? 5 days a week, a Hebrew school, shul every Shabbos. Bar mitzvahs were feats of strength, davening from Birkat HaShachar in the morning to Havdalah way late into the night, walking, of course, to Temple Bethel on Breed Street. Forget that it was flat, uphill both ways. The previous generation is always the greatest generation. The upcoming generation is always the worst generation. And the kids in that upcoming generation are always seemingly taking us to hell in a handbasket. I'm reminded of the television show, dating myself, Sanford & Son. Remember Sanford & Son, right? What happened every time Lionel showed up? Fred's son Lionel, no matter what he did, no matter what he said, it wasn't good enough. It was going to send Fred over the edge. And what did Fred do every time? Put his hand on his heart and said, Elizabeth, this kid's going to give me the big one. I'm coming to join you, right? That's what every generation does. It happened to me when I came here. One of my fondest memories is of Sonny Waxman, of blessed memory. And she didn't like change. And every time I'd make a change, which was often, she would take me by the hand and she would say, Rabbi, just want to let you know that St. John's down the street, it's looking better and better every day. And we all say this. In a few moments, we're going to say it. We're going to sit here and say, Chadesh, Chadesh Yameinu, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. What are we saying? Please, God, make our days like the good old days, right? But that's the problem. We have selective memories when it comes to the good old days. We tend to magnify that which was good. We tend to minimize that which was not. Moses, as a kid, must have been an obnoxious, spoiled, wannabe Egyptian brat. Right? The Dor Bamidbar, the generation in the desert, were a bunch of fetching, kicking, crying children. That's why they called them the children of Israel. It was a miserable 40-year experience. Just ask Moses. The temple times, the best times, the greatest times, look at their track record on the treatment of animal, the treatment of women, genocide. They have a lot to reckon for in that time period. The shtetl was such a great place. A teacher of mine, Rabbi Eliezer Slomovic of blessed memory, who grew up in the shtetl, said the shtetl stinks, right? And he would go on to tell us about political corruption, religious corruption, trapped in loveless marriages, poverty, gossip, feuds between different factions and groups, right? It's important to be honest about the past. It's important to be honest about this community's past. Yes, you went to 5-day-a-week Hebrew school, but you hated it, right? You memorize the entire Siddur, but I hear time and again, you don't speak a word of it. It doesn't speak to your heart. You were dragged to shul every Shabbos by Bubby and Zadie, and then there came a point when you didn't go back to shul, or you didn't go back to the old country. You moved away from Lynn and Chelsea and Mattapan and Dorchester, and it goes on and on. Not to say that they were bad places, but it is to say that we remember what we want to remember, and we forget what we want to forget. And here in Swampscott, it was a great place to live. It was a great place to play golf over at Tedesco Country Club, buy real estate on the Marblehead Neck, or join the beach club if you were a man, and if you were straight, and if you were white, and if you were a Christian. But if you were a gay, black, Jewish convert in an interfaith relationship raising Chinese children, it was terrible. Forget about it. Or you can heed the words of Rabbi Billy Joel, who said you can get just so much from a good thing. You can linger too long in your dreams. Say goodbye to the oldies but goodies, because the good old days weren't always good, and tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. All of us at every age need to remember that the good old days weren't always good, and all of us at every age need to remember that tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. Listen to this and tell me who said it. Children today now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect to their elders. They no longer rise when their elders enter the room. Oi, right? Who said this? I added the oi. Socrates, 5th century, BCE. Now listen to this. Tell me who said it. What is happening to our young people? They disrespect their elders, disobey their parents, ignore the law, rioting in the streets with inflamed, wild notions, morals decaying. What has become of them? Who said this? Plato, the next generation, his student. And who said this? A generation numbering in the millions has gone so far in decay that it acts without social responsibility. High school kids today are armed, out for only what they can get. The lost generation is here, and they are rotting before our very eyes. This was said in 1936 in Harper's Monthly magazine. 1936, when the greatest generation were kids, were teens. The greatest generation were reviled as teens. The greatest generation were deemed wayward and lazy and cruel and selfish. And yet, 6 decades later, Tom Brokaw rendered the verdict that we all agree with, that this was a generation whose sacrifices not only built modern America, but saved the world, and they earned the right to be called the greatest generation. But that's the point, right? They earned that right. They were given the opportunity to move from those youthful ways into adulthood to becoming the greatest generation. Maybe today's youth are no different. Maybe millennials, those born in 1980 and younger, simply need to be given time, because we have stats to prove that we may be very well raising the next greatest generation. This was taken from a cover story in Time magazine called Millennials, the Me generation, written by Joel Stein. He says, yes, millennials have the chutzpah of entitlement. They do. They believe they are entitled to a cleaner environment, and they're driving ecology forward leaps and bounds. They believe they're entitled to a sustainable economy. They buy less than previous generations. They save more than previous generations. Granted, it's easier to save when you're living on your parents' couch. It's not to say that they're perfect or great. It's to say that they're real and they're doing some really good things. Yeah, they have a lack of respect for inherited values, says Stein. Values like racism and sexism and homophobia and religious intolerance. In every measurable category, this younger generation is the most accepting and inclusive generation in the history of humanity. Yeah, they lack fear of prevailing power structures. They believe they can take on corrupt corporations through creating little startup companies and 99-cent iPhone applications. They are challenging, changing, redefining business and commerce as we know it for the better. They believe they can influence governments, and they have. They put President Barack Obama in office with an unprecedented social media campaign. They believe they can take down corrupt governments. Look what's happening in the Middle East, as always, beginning and being driven by the younger generation, the generation that pushes and challenges the status quo. In fact, Tom Brokaw loves the millennials. He calls them the wary generation. He thinks their cautiousness in life to life's decisions is a smart response. Their great mantra, he says, has been challenge convention, find new and better ways of doing things in the face of great social upheaval, world terror, unprecedented problems and changes. They have the chutzpah to hope, they have the chutzpah to dare, and they have the chutzpah to dream. Their problems are the ones that we have dumped upon their doorstep. They are cleaning up our messes that they have inherited, and they're doing it in their way, on their terms. But that's what a great generation does. It rises up and faces these things. But the truth is, this is not new. Every generation, every up-and-coming generation, in many ways, is the answer to the prayers of the previous generation. The greatest generation, some of you, fought for liberty and freedom and opportunity. The boomers among us, many of the baby boomers are here, fought for equality and fairness and tolerance. Generation X, 1980s and 90s, my contemporaries, still not really sure what we've accomplished. The jury's out on us. But millennials, the next crop of kids after them, they are challenging the existing rules. They are confronting the status quo. They are trying to improve our way of life. They are cleaning up our mess. So Joel Stein finishes by saying, so yes, we have all the data about narcissism and laziness and entitlement. But a generation's greatness isn't determined by data. It's determined by how they react to the challenges that befall them. And just as important, by how we react to them. They are indeed the biggest generation in the history of the United States at 80 million strong. Whether you think they are the new greatest generation of optimistic entrepreneurs or a group of 80 million people about to implode in a dwarf star of tears when their expectations go unmet, largely depends on you and how you view change. Me, says Stein, I choose to believe in the children, in these millennials, because God knows they believe in themselves. Today is Rosh Hashanah. It is a time where we look back and we do appreciate where we come from, and we appreciate what we have been given, and we appreciate what has been done for us and the sacrifices made on our behalf, and we are grateful for those who come before us and do the best they can with what they have, and then they give us life. But we also look back honestly at ourselves and our past, looking back not at the expense of truth, looking back not distorting reality, looking back not remembering only what we want to remember. We need to remember and teach the next generation. The good old days weren't always good, and we need to remember and teach the next generation that tomorrow and tomorrow's generation aren't as bad as you might think. We must stop focusing on gloom and doom and shortcomings and flaws and failures of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We must build this next generation up, not tear them down. We must encourage them. We must empower them. We must start seeing all that is good and right and great in these kids. We must start believing in them. And they need to look at you. They need to realize you and your generation gave for them, sacrificed in so many ways. You need to look at them and see the remarkable qualities and gifts that they bring to the conversation, and we all need to look around and open our eyes and see the beauty, the goodness, the possibility, the hope that abounds. That's what it means to say Lador Vador, from generation to generation. We want our children to rise up. We want our children to surpass us, and we want their children to surpass them. That's the Jewish enterprise. That's the point. Me, I choose to believe in the children and these millennials because God knows they believe in themselves. So per our millennial cantor's idea, let's stop talking, Rabbi, and let's start singing, cantor and choir and everybody here. Let's take 2 songs from the greatest generation era, What a Wonderful World and Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Let's take them combined by a baby boomer who combined the 2 of them. Let's take them now performed by an intergenerational band, and now let's sing them by the next greatest generation. One generation gives birth to a song, the next generation leaves its imprint, and the next generation, this future generation, who knows what they will do with it, but I'm sure it'll be great. I think to myself, what a wonderful world we've inherited. I think to myself, what a wonderful time to be alive. I think to myself, what a wonderful future we have ahead of us. I think to myself, what a wonderful set of generations under one roof. I think to myself, we should all think to ourselves, salvation ain't somewhere over the rainbow. It's here, it's now, it's right in front of you. And I think to myself, we all think to ourselves, or we should, what a wonderful world.
Try not to.
You know the tune, hum in, join in. It's on your blue sheets if you don't know the words to this version. You know the words. Open your hearts, open your mouths. Join the next greatest generation.
Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, and the dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true. Upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where troubles melt like lemon drops, high above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. The dreams that you dare to, why, oh then why can't
Well, I see trees of green and red roses too. I'll watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Of day, I like the dark, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you.
I hear babies cry and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll know, and I think to myself, what a wonderful
Join in, multi-generations, all under one roof. The greatest generations, each and every one of us.
Dreams that you dare to, oh why can't I?
You can give it up for Aishir.